to adjourn for a closed meeting or to open the closed meeting?
To go into closed meeting.
Motion to enter into closed meeting.
I'll second, but then Todd needs to read it, right?
For the reasons stated in the agenda.
Yeah.
For reasons stated.
You want to read that, Marty?
Okay, one minute.
You ready? Be it resolved, the Montgomery County Board of Supervisors, Montgomery County, Virginia, hereby into closed meeting for the purpose of discussing the following. Section 2.2-3711, discussing concerning a prospective business or industrial or the expansion of existing business or industrial where no previous announcement has been made of the business or industrial interest in locating or expanding its facilities in the community. Project number 2019-019. Consultation with legal counsel employed or retained by a public body regarding specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by such counsel. Technology, manufacturing, building. 3, consultation with legal counsel and briefing from staff member or consultant pertaining to actual or probable litigation where such consultation or briefing in open meeting would affect the negotiation or litigating post of the public body. Consultation with legal counsel employed or retained by a public body regarding specific legal matters requiring provision of legal advice by such counsel. Opioid litigation. Madam Secretary, call roll, please.
Mr. Tuck?
Aye.
Mr. Christiansburg?
Aye.
Mr. Motts?
Aye.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Ms. Bone?
Aye.
Mr. Shepherd?
Aye.
Chair King?
Aye.
7 ayes.
Is there a motion coming out of closed?
So moved. So moved.
Second.
Okay, there you go.
Whereas the Board of Supervisors of Montgomery County convened a closed meeting on this date pursuant to affirmative recorded vote and in accordance with the provision of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, and whereas Section 2.2-3711 of the Code of Virginia requires a certification by the Board that such closed meetings was conducted in conformity with Virginia laws. Now therefore be it resolved that the Board of Supervisors of Montgomery County, Virginia hereby certify that to the best of each member's knowledge, only public business matters lawfully exempt from open meetings requirements by Virginia laws were discussed in the closed meeting to which this certification resolution applies, and only such public business matters as was identified in the motion made in the closed meetings were heard, discussed, or considered by the Board. Madam Secretary, call roll, please.
Mr. Motts?
Aye.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Ms. Bone?
Aye.
Mr. Shepherd?
Aye.
Mr. Tuck?
Aye.
Mr. Kowski?
Aye.
Chair King?
Aye.
7 ayes.
Thank you. Now you want to announce that?
Yep. At this point, we will rise for a moment of silence. Then I'll be glad to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Let us pledge, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, board members, our first item of business this evening is a presentation. We have Dave Clark from VDOT with us this evening. So, David, come on up.
Good evening. A few updates on what we've been working on maintenance-wise throughout the county over the past month, and a couple of updates on some construction projects. Maintenance has been a good time for us to get caught up on a lot of things. I know the dry weather has been bad for some, but it's been good for us in getting some of those things like our patching done and some mowing done. late in that dry spell, we did have to stop some mowing in certain places because there were some brush fires breaking out, actually. Mostly it happened in Pulaski. I don't think we had one. Well, we did have one in Montgomery, right near the 109, I think. Mostly it's been along the interstate, but we did have instances of sparks seen by some of our guys mowing. So we cut off that for a while. It wasn't growing anyway, so it was okay. But we have been doing a lot of brush cutting, patching, the surface treatment schedule, and in fact now all overlay schedules are done in Montgomery County for this year. The last part of it was surface treatment, and that included some roads up in subdivisions on Brush Mountain. If you recall, we had some citizens come during a public hearing last time asking about that. That was put on the schedule and completed. Again, just sort of the routine, everyday, we're kind of all over the place on the patching. I'm not going to go through all the routes of patching, although there was a request for Craig's Mountain Road, Bow Hill Road, that was, we did get the patching done on that one. Some pipe replacements as well. Construction project-wise, Sydney Church Road, which has been on the 6-year plan for a long time. In fact, we split it in two. It's a 2-mile-long road. We got the second part of that finished. So Sydney Church Road is now done. We will advertise for the surface treatment of Mount Pleasant Road next month. So that's, bids won't come in for another month and then awarded. So you're looking at spring for that to be awarded to the contractor, and probably, it won't take all summer. So you're looking at some spring or summer for Mount Pleasant Road to be done. That's a revenue sharing project. And we just have one other small revenue sharing project we're trying to nail down. That's on Boner's Run. We did spend a good week or so with our equipment getting it ready for winter. We have a dry run that we go through, getting all of our trucks and plows and everything ready as if it was going to have bad weather the next day. And we have an independent group come out of Salem and grade all of our area headquarters on how well their trucks are prepared, and so that took place this month. I think that's about what I've got on our updates. One other thing, I'm sorry. This was using safety money. Ellett Road that goes between Cambria, goes down into the valley. We did a soil nail project on that, which is building up the shoulder using horizontally drilled shafts with concrete and pin. If you're familiar with that road, the guardrail had sunk so low that it probably was completely ineffective. Anything would go over the guardrail. It's an expensive process, and in fact, we couldn't get the whole thing. That's one of my big regrets on that, but we will keep saving up money, and that eventually the whole thing will get done, and we'll get that, and that'll make that much safer in that windy road that goes down into the valley from Cambria. So that's completed. There's still, you'll still see some cones in there. They have to stay there until the concrete has reached its full strength, but then those cones will be removed, and you'll have a nice regulation height guardrail there with a little bit of shoulder. So, but I'd be glad to take any other requests or questions the board has.
David, have you heard anything back from the folks in Salem about Route 603?
We are working on a through truck restriction for that.
Okay, I didn't know if the information that I provided you all from the sheriff's office maybe affected that.
I'll check and
because
see.
it turns out it was just the one accident that they had found involving commercial. So
okay, but I'll double check on that.
Okay, I was just curious to see if they were continuing on that.
They're still working.
A couple of things. Brush cutting on Catawba Road, way down towards the Roanoke line. There's some curves that, it feels like a one lane, they say. So do you have a sense of within what kind of time frame that might be taken care of?
We did several roads, mostly in the sort of the Christiansburg area, Crab Creek and Woodrow we got last time. They may be moving around the county. I'll see what the schedule is. I don't know why it wouldn't. I don't think we have any kind of major priority list for that. So if that's a concern, we can get that one.
And then at the top of Clay Street going down into Cedar Orchards, there's all those...
I looked at that, actually. You mentioned that before, and I looked at that. There's one spot where there's some really quite large brush.
And then Luster's Gate by the cheese factory. I got an email from a parent and resident. He says, I stand out at the bus stop with my kid now, and people fly down that road. Something needs to be done. There was some kind of speed study done in May. What was that about, if not to update the speed limit? What confused me then was that I said something about the speed being adjusted based on the data that was collected, as if the speed actually traveled on the road would somehow determine what the speed limit should be. Speed limit on the road varies between 35 and 45. The area under discussion is a residential area with multiple driveways opening directly onto the road. There is a T intersection with Harding at one end. The question really isn't when VDOT wants to do a speed study. The question is, what do I need to do to get that section of street declared as a residential area and get the speed limit adjusted accordingly? Is there a residential
There's an
area?
actual definition. I'm not sure exactly the number. It has to do with how many residences per mile or half mile, maybe even a smaller section than that of road. They did a speed study through there, determined that it was posted appropriately currently. I'll see how they addressed the residential aspect of that, if you'd like.
But I had been trying to follow up to find out, okay, they did a speed study earlier this year. Does it take 5 years before the next speed study could be done? Because I believe that if you did a speed study on the first warm spring day on a Friday while campus was in session, it'd be a madhouse down there.
But, the way a speed study actually, the way they do it is that they look at the 85th percentile speed. So if you get a lot of people going really fast, that's going to say, that's what the speed ought to be. So if they're complying with a 45, 85% of the people complying with a 45, then that's justification for leaving the speed as it is.
So do you have a limit to when the next speed study could actually occur?
There's no set time. I don't know if they would want to look at it a year later or not. If that's, I don't think they would look at it in under a year.
Okay. And then you said that you would follow up on the residential area.
I'll see how they address that, because they're pretty meticulous in those speed studies, and they look at all the factors, and they will say one way or the other whether they thought it conformed to a residential area, which
Okay.
is described in law, actually, residential areas.
Could I get a copy of that section, however it's described?
Sure, absolutely.
That'd be great.
Yep.
And then Galleon Ridge Road, I thought that you were going to be doing a count on that road. Was that done?
We have not done a count yet on that.
Do you have an idea of when that might be done?
But we'd like to do it at a good time. I think it may still be a good enough time this fall, probably, to do one.
Okay. And then the Taylor Hollow curve and bridge. Am I saying that road right? Yeah, isn't it Taylor Hollow?
Taylor Hollow, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we put that on 6-year plan with the low water bridge, yes.
Any
I haven't
repairs?
checked to see if they've gone and fixed that spot that's eroded yet or not. I went out there a couple of weeks ago and they had not.
Okay.
But I reminded them that that's still
There.
eroding away right there.
Right. And then the last thing for me is Nellie's Cave Road, around the curve, about halfway down the hill, on the inside of the curve, there's a couple potholes there that are getting worse and worse.
About
Thank you.
halfway, you said? Well, I'll find it.
Yeah.
About halfway.
Thank you, sir.
Supervisor Shepherd.
Just a couple things. Well, on your brush list, update Walnut Spring Road. It's like one of those. It's one lane too.
Which one is it? What's Spring?
Walnut Spring.
Walnut Spring, yeah.
Right there at Costas
Yes.
driving range. It's the worst part.
Yep.
And I had a guy call me, and he complained about his road never being paved. He had been there since 1977 and it had only been paved one time, and that was Mount Zion Road, and which kind of surprised me because I didn't think it had ever been paved. But then I remember it seemed like they messed up one year and paved it back in the 70s. Honestly, I mean, everything else around it's surface treated. So,
yeah.
I mean, but anyway, that's just information for you. I've had several.
We did use some construction money. The county authorized this in several, well, it's probably been 10, 15 years ago. plant mix apart from the bridge down at the bottom all the way up to about Keister's Branch.
Well, that's probably what he's talking about because that's the section he lives in.
Well, that's got plant mix on it, and we did that purposely because it stays shaded in the winter.
Oh, yeah.
And
It does.
I drove through it. I mean, the Brooksfield end's got some potholes and stuff, but I thought
Yeah.
the rest of it looked pretty good.
Yeah, well, they actually come in earlier in the spring, in the summer, and bladed asphalt in those holes, so it's rough, but
Yeah.
the holes are gone.
Okay.
I've had several calls complaining about the speed on McCoy Road, and I have explained to each one of those people how to get a speed study done, and that would be a daunting task. Is there any other way other than getting 50% of the people to sign a petition?
That's not really a VDOT requirement petition. It's a county process instituted a long time ago, just based on the fact that sometimes you can get one person on a road who wants to speed, and if you do it, everyone else on the road is mad. That's
Right.
mostly applicable to more local type roads, McCoy Road being kind of a through road. We certainly wouldn't require anything more than the board saying, sort of
Right.
everyone nodding, yeah, please do a speed study.
Okay, well, and that's what I told the lady. The
Yeah.
first one that called, I was like, well, you're probably going to make a bunch of people mad. And then I've had several other calls since then, so maybe not, I don't know. And one of the problems is bicycles, which leads me into the other. We got a letter from Joanne Bolding Price about Merrimack Road and the bicycles, and I had a conversation with her today explaining that was a state issue just because of the law. But anyway, that's all I have.
Yeah, thanks.
Any update about the intersection of Price's Fork and 114, there where that store is, about doing anything about, a turn? or
We
something?
the only other update is that we applied for funds to get a turn lane. It did not get approved, but we have another round of applications for projects coming up, and I think it would be a good idea to put that one back in.
Yeah, I do too.
Yep, it's a good
Thanks.
project.
Appreciate you coming, and they did close off the end of Meadow Creek this morning.
Yes.
We appreciate you coming.
Yep, thank you very much.
Thanks, David. Board members, our next item tonight is a MPO update from Dan Brew, but I don't see Dan here this evening, is he?
Last I talked to him, he's planning on being here.
Oh, well, that's not good.
Maybe something happened.
Well, we will certainly defer this to the next agenda, and we'll bring you up to date on that. So that concludes presentations, recognitions, and awards. Public address.
Public address. Going to public address, no one has signed up to speak. If you'd like to step forward, state your name and address, and you'd have 5 minutes. Seeing no one, we'll close public address. Addendum.
No addendum this evening, sir.
No addendum. Is there a motion for items of consent?
So moved.
Second.
Is any discussion? Madam Secretary, call roll, please.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Ms. Bennett?
Aye.
Mr. Shepherd?
Aye.
Mr. Tuck?
Aye.
Mr. Fitchukowski?
Aye.
Mr. Motts?
Aye.
Chair King?
Aye.
7 ayes.
Thank you. Is there a motion to go into work session?
So moved.
Second.
Madam Secretary, call roll, please.
Ms. Bennett?
Aye.
Mr. Shepherd?
Aye.
Mr. Tuck?
Aye.
Mr. Fitchukowski?
Aye.
Mr. Motts?
Aye.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Chair King?
Aye.
7 ayes.
Board members, the first item we have this evening under work session is a broadband study update. And I'm going to recognize folks from Thompson and Luton and Blue Ridge Advisory Services Group to provide the report. And gentlemen, I'll let you guys introduce yourselves as you come up. We had a meeting with the broadband committee earlier this afternoon, heard some exciting things, so I'm looking forward to Bob and the folks sharing information with you this evening. Thank y'all for being here.
Thank you and good evening. I'm Bob Pickey. I'm with Blue Ridge Advisory Services Group. With me is my colleague Skip Skinner and our business partner from Thompson and Litton, Eric Price. First, I want to acknowledge all the help and cooperation we have gotten from your staff and all of the stakeholders in Montgomery County. It's been very rewarding for us, and we've gotten a lot of very valuable information very quickly. We think we're probably about 50% done with the initiative. So what I'd like to do first is just give you a sense of the size of the market that we're talking about, and we're dealing with high-speed internet. So from both the commercial segment and the residential space, we think this is currently about a $78 million addressable market, going to about $100 million within the next 10 years. Now, this excludes the student housing and the university segment. So there's about 39,000 bodies that we did not include in defining this addressable market. We think it's important to sort of be able to measure what we're trying to affect. That's why we start with modeling the telecommunications opportunity in the entire county. Now, there's a lot more detail than this. We're kind of giving you the executive summary version. At a very high level, our findings are that really Montgomery County is atypical of Southwest Virginia, and I know you're aware of this. It's very wealthy relative to the other counties, highly educated, a very high growth rate. It's completely atypical of the rest of the region. It's really, when I said today when I was meeting with the entire working committee, it's the jewel in the crown of Southwest Virginia.
I told them we already knew that.
I'll bet you never get tired of hearing it.
No, just say it again and again.
The commercial segment's relatively well served, and again, sort of atypical of why we're engaged. Normally, counties engage us to drive economic development through the use of telecommunications and advanced services. The economic developers are telling us that it is not negatively impacted by the availability of broadband in the region. There's one small business in Christiansburg, I think it's in the historic Cambria area, that's potentially going to leave because they don't have broadband. But other than that, it's not an issue. There are at least 5 service providers that address the commercial space. Again, sort of an embarrassment of riches. There is fiber everywhere in the county. The economic developers have told us that broadband is an issue for the knowledge workers in the region. There are 1,600 information technology coders, software developers that work here. These are people who want to have always-on broadband. They need it at work and they need it at home. So we have been directed through our research to focus all of our efforts on solving the residential broadband problem. That is how we're going to affect improvement. Broadband availability really is an issue only in the rural parts of the county and with a few exceptions in the city and the towns. Every supervisor has told us they want us to solve the unserved and underserved problem to a person. Now, the way everybody wants to see it done is varied a little bit, but we have been influenced to go toward a market-based solution. Try and find something that the private sector can solve in a partnership with the county. And where possible, go after grant funding or other forms of capital. Any questions so far? The underserved.
I have a question.
Yes.
So when you said that 5 service providers are providing broadband to the county, I would expect that they may overlap in the towns, but when you get to rural, you're lucky if there's one. Is that correct?
You are correct. In fact, when we say there's 5 service providers, we have identified 11 total service providers. These are the providers that address the commercial segment. So the commercial customers, large data users, businesses, They have multiple service providers to choose from, and school systems as well. So they can use the subpoena power of an RFP to get multiple proposals, and this has driven their prices down and their service levels up. It is strictly a residential problem.
Okay, and then you did mention, and then when you were talking through the last slide, that fiber was everywhere. But I think you're talking about mostly in the towns. Is that correct?
Right. It's relatively speaking, it's everywhere. And when we talk about Montgomery County and looking at the other southwestern Virginia, when we say everywhere, you're rich with fiber. It's not everywhere, but it is predominantly in the main corridors and in the larger populous areas. But again, there is a lot of fiber infrastructure in Montgomery County and the city of Bradford.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I should not have used the word everywhere. You're correct. There is this paucity of fiber in the most rural parts of the county. But all the transportation corridors have it, so it's a matter of just maybe a little bit of lateral development. The underserved is a little bit more complex issue. It sometimes deals with affordability. We've all talked about this. But in most cases, when we say underserved, we're talking about speed and reliability. The matter of affordability is really an issue where you have school-aged children at home. The county has made such a commitment to digital curricula and the Chromebook program that the students who leave with these resources and get home and have no high-speed internet are essentially being left behind. We have been challenged to solve this. We have talked to service providers about ways to do this, but we're not here to solve that problem right now. The most galvanizing elements of the underserved community, education of the youth, and the need for remote workers to have access all of the time. We heard stories about people who have relocated to the region to work for a software development company, found the home that they loved, the landed gentry, bought the home without checking to see if there was high-speed internet, and sadly discovered it was not available. Finally, we've heard about residents moving into the region. Not surprising, Virginia Tech attracts people from Tier 1 research education institutes around the world. So we've got people moving here from California, Texas, even Richmond, that have had fiber to the home services either through Verizon Fios or AT&T Fiber, and they get here and they're very disappointed because it's difficult to go back once you've seen or experienced that level of service. That's it. What we'd like to do is sort of move into the meat of the order and tell you about the communities that we've identified.
Thank you, Bob. And again, I'd like to add my thanks to all of you who participated in the survey. I know you've either spoken to myself or Bob, but we had some, in addition to the survey data, I think we conducted something like 30 surveys. We also had the benefit of the prior SurveyMonkey data that had been done, the broadband speed tests that had been conducted by the PDC. So our hats off to the PDC and working with them to do that. I think there were like 1,600 data points, which if you take out the student population, that's about a 6% sample size for the county. So that's a rich data set that we're continuing to mine to look at. But a combination of the interviews, here's the list going through. We identified 12 communities as being unserved. Again, we had some real interesting discussions around the table about some specific areas in Christiansburg. We've already talked about Cambia and some of the challenges in that particular community. But again, these are all communities either were mentioned a single time during our interview process, or in most cases it was mentioned multiple times in the interview process. So that I would ask that give some consideration to that. You'll have access to this slide certainly. Give consideration back to this and give some feedback back to Mr. Meadows after you have a chance to look at it. And again, here's a map showing these unserved areas. We kind of had a lot of discussion about being kind of a northern tier versus a southern tier. And we heard a lot of discussions about Ryan and some of these other communities in the south. But then when you put it up on the map, you see the unserved areas themselves are predominantly in the northern portion of the county. So with the northwest portion of the county. So again, just interesting data. Jumping over to the unserved areas, we identified 29 separate communities as being underserved. Excuse me. Thank you. And this could be, outages, multiple outages. It didn't necessarily mean that they didn't have some type of a regular routine service that you could measure 25-3 years an example. But either they had outages or there's some reason to consider them underserved. And again, we had 29 areas. It's actually on two different pages that again we'd ask that you take a look at some point at your convenience and just kind of see if these things still make sense to you based on your all's discussion and your all's local knowledge certainly. Again, here's the map. You see it for the most part it occurs all over the county. You can see the purple areas. We had a area back at actually the previous map in the unserved areas. There was a Walton area near Radford. One of TNL staff people live out there and has no access. His only access is to Hughes, which again, this is information that you all hear all the time, I'm sure. But again, it's helpful to be able to add, when you see how it impacts an individual and what they're trying to do with their personal life or educating their children or whatever the case may be, it's impactful. It really makes a sense.
I'll just add this, that if they wanted to dish out $50,000, they could get service because they were a mile away from the line. So again, you've heard this before, but it's firsthand.
I have a question. In the unserved or underserved areas that you list, do you include the people that have service but it's not high speed? Did you include those?
We included those people who again, this is through the self-report that they were underserved, or based on what they told us, it wasn't. But they may have had some type of service in the underserved area, but it wasn't reliable. Okay. For some reason, they didn't think it was optimal. And again, that was a self-report.
Yes, and also satellite. We consider satellite-based internet service as non-service because it's just the absolute last resort. So if you have satellite-based service, we still consider that as unserved.
Talking about the gentleman in his shop with the $10,000, I think, Ms. Bond, you told me about a particular situation of somebody having to pay $3,000 or multiple families paying $3,000 in order to see that the connectivity came down their community, down their street. So any questions about those unserved areas?
I do. So if you go back to the maps, you can see there's spots, but how in the world could, Mount Tabor Road, well, let's go down Catawba Valley, where, I'm sorry, it's, if I can describe it, you've got the green section of the Jefferson Forest, you've got pink right next to that. Right below that is a line, and I don't know if you can, so there has to be a gap between that and the little spot right below it, right? So when you say it's self-reporting, when do you connect the places? Because obviously if they don't have it and the people before it doesn't have it, then the people in between can't have it either.
Well, one of the process that we'll go through after we get some type of an agreement on these communities, then we go to work and start designing some type of a network, whether it's wireless or a fiber-based that will hand off to a wireless system, and then from that you'll be able to draw some conclusions, and then we'll be able to make some recommendations. And I don't want to get ahead of myself in the recommendation slide, but we'll be able to make some recommendations into just areas of seems to be getting the highest on the list. We'll draw some conclusions and be able to rank order these communities. So that process kind of comes during that ranking process, to be able to say, okay, we know we need to go from A to C, but B is in between. So how do we serve that? So that's part of that process that we'll be employing next steps. So.
Thank you.
So we'd ask that you take these lists, study them, provide some feedback to Mr. Meadows, add to them, ask us to do additional research if necessary, but this is basically sort of the key findings that we've identified today. And this is the areas that we want to attack. Now, one of the things that we told your selection committee when we were engaged was we weren't going to give you a study that would sit on a shelf. We planned to provide you with an implementation plan. So we've developed a series of recommendations to do that. And we framed our recommendations in sort of 3 time frames: immediate action, intermediate action, something in the 2 to 3 year time frame, and sort of long-term things to consider going forward. We're recommending that the county hire a dedicated resource to go after partnerships with service providers and seek funding to solve the connectivity problems in the county. I believe that people do what you pay them to do. And I think we need to have somebody that we task with turning up a certain number of homes within a defined time frame. We measure the performance and we compensate that person for performance. I feel that there's no single point of accountability in the county right now to address this issue. We heard from service providers who complained about lengthy times for permitting, access to towers, easements, county facilities. I believe that a lot of this is kind of false criticism. I hear this everywhere I go, but I do believe that having a single person that's responsible for turning up service and working in a collaboration with service providers will yield the results. We also suggest that you consider forming or joining a broadband authority as enabled under the Virginia Wireless Services Authorities Act. Now, there already is an authority in the New River Valley. It's the New River Valley Network Wireless Authority. The concern is that they serve a much larger area. They address Giles, Pulaski, and Radford. Our only interest is for the benefit of our client, Montgomery County. I fear that if we joined in an existing authority, it would potentially dilute the nature of our problem, because frankly, those counties have much poorer service than we have. It's something that we need to consider, however, because it enables access to a whole nother level of capital. In the intermediate time frame, we suggest you consider permitting new housing developments with the requirement that they build an empty conduit system suitable to enable a fiber to the home network when the service providers elect to offer it in that neighborhood. We have heard stories about new master plan communities coming out of the ground of multiple hundred or even 1,000 units. This is a relatively inexpensive engagement for the developer. The trench is already open. It's an empty conduit system, but it would enable deployment of a fiber to the home network in the future without ever cutting a street or trenching a yard. We have done this, recommended this, and drafted permitting conditions for some of our clients in California, admittedly a different scale. They were developing units of 10,000 residential homes at a time, right on the cusp of when fiber to the home was going to be commercially available. We also suggest that when you're opening a trench for any purpose, any significant trench, particularly wet utilities, you consider deploying a telecommunications conduit along with that utility line extension. It may not be used or useful immediately, but at some point in the future, it could save additional trenching and capital spending. Finally, we suggest reviewing the franchise requirements within the county to the towns and the city of Radford. We have heard from service providers that they view the franchise requirements as a barrier to entry. They would gladly serve a particular neighborhood, but they don't want to have the franchise burden to serve every home that meets their density, minimum density requirements. We're not advocating that any action be taken on this, but if I hear from multiple service providers, maybe it is an issue. I think we have to be in the business of removing barriers from network deployment. In the longer term, I think that everybody in this county is going to want a fiber to the home network, especially around Blacksburg and the university. We need to think about that and what kind of actions could we take that would enable such a deployment. It's the gold standard. We are realistic. We know that we're never going to solve all of these unserved and underserved communities with a fiber to the home network. The cost is too prohibitive based on population density. But in certain markets, fiber to the home has to be considered. And whatever we can do to foment competition will improve services and lower prices to the ultimate customer.
Any questions before we move on?
Yes, one about the hiring a dedicated person. I saw funding was there, so would that funding include going after the grants that we saw at the broadband conference that we were unable to get any of?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, there's just talking about funding. There are many opportunities that partnering is going to be advantageous to the county to look at, and we're looking at all those and we'll make recommendations on that.
Okay, thank you.
I have two questions before we move on. In the intermediate action step, consider conditioning the permitting of new housing units with the requirement for a fiber to the home conduit system. Is that, and I'm looking at Marty, is that legal to require that?
Yeah, that was my thought. I don't know if we have authority. I mean, we have to look. California is a home rule state. They can do a lot of things that a Dillon rule state like us cannot do. But I mean, we could check and see.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind to look into that and then get back to us with more information on whether we can do that in Virginia. And I know the laws changed last July regarding proffers, and so what can we do to implement that intermediate action? And then on your immediate action step, just based on your experience in this type of marketplace, what does a broadband authority look like? What type of region would it cover? Would that be something that we're looking more Roanoke, Giles, Pulaski, a bigger region, or do you think it would be more effective to consider forming something that's more local?
I would consider, again, we have a single client, Montgomery County. It requires two jurisdictions. Say Montgomery County and the city of Radford. There is definitely some benefit to going after these funds when you can present a larger regional footprint.
So like Montgomery County, Radford, and the two towns possibly would be, is that large enough to form a broadband authority? I guess that's more my question.
Two,
is that,
yes. You're required to defer to the council to weigh in on it. The Roanoke Valley Broadband Authority was 2 cities, 2 counties. Again, that was an economic development effort, but that's all it took. Now that enabled them to access VRA funding, which is backed by moral obligation bonds. That's it. And they built a $9 million network.
Okay. I just wanted some clarity on the size you're looking at, because some authorities are giant, covering huge areas, and some of them are very small. So I just kind of wanted some clarity there.
And also understand that when you look at the funding that is available, economic development authorities, the county as a whole, town, the city, can also partner and apply for these funds. But again, I think there is some strength in a collaborative partnership whether it's just Montgomery and Radford, or if it goes to the PDC as a whole. But there is strength in numbers, and I think there's something definitely to look at.
Thank you.
I have questions. So for the person that potentially could be hired, where does that person usually reside in a government? In the planning department, in the economic development department? In your experience, where is that person?
I guess I would answer that from my perspective. The planning department is probably the most efficient way if they're dealing with permit reviews and trying to facilitate some of those discussions. However, if your grant funds are coming through your county administrator's office, I could also make an argument that maybe it needs to reside in that, or even finance. But I think there's different models that are available to you. But again, looking at the broad brush, you're trying to facilitate these partnerships with individuals, so with the individual companies and so forth. So it's just what's going to make the most sense for Montgomery County and your existing providers of service. So.
Make just a quick comment on that too, and that was based on something that came out of the meeting earlier today. Partnerships, when we talked about opening a trench, you put a water line project in, being able to put a piece of conduit in. What we're hearing is a lot of times these water projects would progress to the point that it's actually too late to try to plan to put the piece of conduit in because the permitting and everything's already taken place. So that needs to take place at the planning stage with the water authority or with the town or with the city or whomever. So it would need to be somebody that is kind of overseeing and seeing the big picture with development in the county, wherever that may be.
So if you've got an active public service authority, you could also make a case that might be a good place to put somebody of that stature.
So who would actually pay for the conduit and the labor to put it in? Who does that?
Well, the conduit
What have you
itself,
seen?
we were talking about partnerships with developers doing it that. But one of the other scenarios we were talking about was, and we didn't talk about it tonight, within this group, we talked about the earlier group. There's actually some pushback on that particular recommendation. One of the providers said, instead of dedicating X amount of money to that, buy conduit and work with us as a partner and developer in order to help facilitate that service and get X number of customers every year based on that. We're not recommending that just because that has a tendency, that type of public-private partnership that monopolizes a particular service. So we have a tendency not to recommend that, although it could work. But again, that's something that the county is like your VDOT work, that you're doing cooperative arrangements with VDOT or developers on a shopping center for a water system or whatever like that. It would probably take some form like that. I think one of the deliverables that you're expecting in the future is maybe some type of a public-private partnership scenario, for lack of a better word, and we can flesh that out in more detail with that particular activity and deliverable as well.
So you talk about this telecommunications conduit. Is telecommunications only broadband, or does that include actually phone line, or is there no such thing as a phone line anymore?
Everything is going away from copper and going to fiber optic transmission. So it would be a fiber optic cable of some type. Even the Comcast, an example, they use a hybrid coax system. But what they're doing today is they're bringing data and bringing coverage into the community by some type of a fiber connection, and then they'll go to some type of a cabinet and then take coax outside of that cabinet to the individual home. So again, I think what we're in the scenario we're talking about a fiber to the home connection, which would be fiber all the way. But we realize there's not every place in Montgomery County that's going to see the benefit of that. But once you have that fiber in place, then you can do wireless capabilities. You've got a lot more opportunities to deliver that service through other means, because the fiber optic capabilities, the density requirements are going to be greater for that. So again, that's one of our next steps, is to give you some recommendations about what that design is going to look like. So.
2 more questions. One is about the franchise requirement. Obviously, you shared with us that the competitors see it as a barrier. How do we determine that it is, in fact, an issue? You didn't say that it was, in fact, an issue that you heard. I'm not quite sure about your wording about that.
You essentially characterized it correctly. We don't know specifically that it's a barrier. A service provider identified 2 or 3 neighborhoods that they want to serve in the county. They do not want to enter into a franchise agreement to do that. They want to cherry pick. That's what some people would call it. Is that ideal? Probably not. Does it address an unserved problem?
Yes, it does.
So if, in my experience, the marketplace leads regulatory reform. I'm not advocating any action relative to the franchise agreements. We're saying study this issue.
Okay. And then my last question for now is, you actually used, especially around Blacksburg and the university. Why?
The university delivers 1 gigabit service to every port on the campus. That's 1,000 megabits. It's the go-to gold standard for internet service. Everybody that's on the campus or in student housing is experiencing that level of speed. We believe the university is going to want their staff, faculty to experience the exact same level of service when they leave the campus. That's why.
Oh, so the university, you think that the university wants that? Nobody else has said
I think
that.
this is a little bit like, the Wayne Gretzky hockey puck. You don't go to the puck, you go to where the puck is going. Floyd County has gigabit service now to the people where they have deployed fiber to the home. I believe that's where it's going to be in the next 5 to 7 years.
So is Virginia Tech going to share their 1 gigabit service?
No.
Is that what you're saying, or?
No, I don't believe so. I think that they're...
that we'll have to put infrastructure around the university so that all the university professors and staff and students will be able to have 1 gig, while the rest of the county doesn't even have service.
Well, I'm not advocating that you do anything. I'm advocating that we find a way for our broadband person to forge partnerships that take us there.
Okay, thank you.
Look, just to clarify, our number 1 objective, solve the unserved problem. People who have no service. What we're going to render to you eventually is something like a 5-year, 10-year plan. And it's going to be attacking the unserved first in any way we can. We are technology agnostic. We don't care if it's wireless, fiber to the home, hybrid fiber coax, or smoke signals, if it can deliver the right level of speed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Quickly wrapping up the next steps, and I think a lot of what you're asking and a lot of the questions that you all have is really going to be in the second phase of this. We're really about halfway through this process right now. So we've gathered the data and we're taking it to the next step. So now we do ask for feedback, both from the committee that we met with this morning and yourselves. Give us information, help us to continue to make sure that we cross the finish line with you and that we're crossing the same finish line. The areas that we identify both as unserved and underserved, we will be developing capital expense estimates for these. And then we will be prioritizing which of these areas are super critical and need to be served first. Now, this is going to be a task for all of us. That's not just for us to identify, but we have to have solutions. We have to have success stories. And unfortunately, we have to pick an area to have a success story, and then we grow from there. So the goal is to have 100% synchronous coverage all over the entire county with fiber, but we know we can't get there immediately. So how are we going to get there? And we have to prioritize some areas to do that. And that would be based on citizens impacted and the capital expense, the partners, and funding that could be available. We'll make final recommendations to the board. Again, we will be having intermediate sessions with the group that we met with earlier today. And again, our goal is actionable results. We want to see solutions implemented. We want to see success stories, and we will assist in any way possible, whether that be with funding applications, help facilitate meetings with service providers, or whatever it is. We're here for you on that. And just looking at our schedule, we are sitting at about milestone 2, looking at today's date, 10/15. We've completed the coverage gaps. We've got all the existing resources, and now we're moving forward into the development plan with a target date for completion around January of 2020. And again, we will continue to work with you any way that we can to make sure that your vision is our vision, so that we continue to move the way that you want us to move. Is there any further questions or anything from the board?
I have kind of a bit of a follow-up on what Supervisor Bond was asking. So in Blacksburg and the areas around the university, does the infrastructure already exist that could be upgraded to provide a gigabit or gigabyte?
There is. If you look at again, when we talk about there's lots of fiber, in Blacksburg there is a lot of fiber.
Right.
So, and I think there are already service levels at the gigabit speed by varying service providers. So yes, you're right. That could be easily upgraded. Again, that recommendation was actually on the long term, fiber to the home, the gigabit. But yes, those could be, and those could be the successes that we continue to build from going out.
When I guess what I'm asking with that initial question is, my priority for the results of this study would be to be more concerned about the areas first that are unserved, then underserved. Because as Bob and I spoke quite extensively, I have 2 children that bring home a computer that is far more functional for them in my home than it is in an unserved child's home. And I think that creates a huge divide in the education level that they're receiving in our public schools. But so if the infrastructure is in place that could be upgraded to provide that gig to the home, do you think it is likely that the market would kind of self-resolve that based on demand in an area like Blacksburg where you have such a condensed population? Or do you think that is something that we as a legislative body should be looking at?
Absolutely.
In my experience, service providers are slow to change anything without a disruptive force.
Okay, that answers that question perfectly.
But again, I think market forces lead regulatory reform. I think we need this broadband person to enter into engagement with the service providers, be a fearless beggar on behalf of the county, and find ways to compel them to upgrade.
Gotcha.
Everybody else will be forced to follow.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Mary?
I just wondered on unserved areas and underserved areas that you have in the pink, is there any way to get population count within those areas?
That will actually be part of the next steps. We will be looking at those areas once they're vetted by you all and by the group. We will be doing house counts.
Okay.
We'll be looking, that will be critical to the capital expense models. So we'll know the exact density at that time of those areas.
Okay.
Those areas will very likely change to pick up some, maybe a little outlying area here or there. But those are the generalized areas.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
A couple quick things. And I probably know the answer to this before I ask. Do they ever put fiber above ground?
Yes, there's a lot of aerial deployment. A lot of it has to do with the condition of the electric distribution plant. Sometimes poles are too crowded. Skip and I worked on a project in far southwest Virginia where the plant was so degraded, the cost of what's called make-ready, making the poles ready to accept the fiber cable, was running about $5,000 per mile. In a few cases, it was so bad it became cheaper to deploy underground.
I see. One thing I forgot about when I met with you guys before, I have a neighbor that's about 2 football fields away across the field from me. He was 3 poles from Comcast, and they wanted $10,000 to bring it to him.
It's not unusual to see service providers request contribution in aid of construction when their drops are further than what's required by the franchise agreement, typically 500, 600 feet. I'm sympathetic to it, but it's not unusual. It's not an unusual practice.
Yeah, that's all.
I have one more question. You all have been doing this for a long time. Do you have a cost per household in rural areas that it would cost to implement?
We do have metrics for that. In fact, that's going to be a deliverable from this next phase.
Okay.
Let's validate the unserved and underserved markets, feedback to Mr. Meadows. He'll provide that to us. We'll drill down and get the housing counts, the linear miles of backbone necessary to address those, and then we'll start building the CapEx models based on industry standards for wireless deployments and fiber deployment.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Thank you.
Thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. This was a priority of the board's at the beginning of the year, and we appreciate all the work you've done so far to get us there. Thank
Thank
you.
you all for your attention.
Thank you.
Sir, next item we have on the agenda, board members, is the 2020 legislative priorities. And we have put those together in a resolution for your consideration. We have grouped those priorities by topic area. We have broadband, education, ERA, a general category we called funding, and we're certainly open to better names for any of these categories, land use, recreation, and transportation. The priorities still extend to about a page and a half, but with the creative genius of our public information folks and Vicki, we're going to take these, if they're adopted, and work to make them magical and fit on one page.
We're going to use our new logo.
We can use our new logo as long as it fits on one page. I've heard that. We need to have it on one page. So we're going to, I think we can certainly do that. These incorporate the comments that we received during the work session a meeting or so ago, and would certainly entertain any discussion or questions regarding what's presented to you this evening.
I have a question. When I saw the transportation, headline, rather, however you want to describe it, I was like, what about rail? Why isn't rail in there? That's a huge transportation need for our area. Do we have it somewhere else in our...
Are you referring to passenger rail?
Yeah, passenger rail.
We should, I just flip through there and we can certainly, yes, that's a very good catch. Thank you. We can certainly add that under the transportation item to continue the support of passenger rail service to the New River Valley.
And we've been very fortunate, and I can, why I didn't even catch that, we are so fortunate that our delegates and senators for our area have been very, very forward-thinking in supporting passenger rail. So that was a great catch. But in saying that, I thought, wow, we're really lucky that our delegates already worked so hard on that, but I definitely think we should remind them that
Yes,
we're
I do
behind it too.
Thank you.
In regards to the code section regarding leasehold interest, I was wondering if we could add the words commercial and commercial real property. That way it makes it clear that we're not trying to tax what would be traditional nonprofit, educational, those type of things. And then I'm not sure whether we put at leasehold interest in
Commercial real property?
yes, or commercial real estate, to make it clear that what we're going for is when a nonprofit is engaging in commercial activity with the real estate, not when the nonprofit is functioning as we all expect it to in educational services.
But if I could just mention it, if like the foundation was doing it and the property was going to be used for tech, it wouldn't come under that.
To begin with?
Yeah, because
Okay.
it wouldn't be, because what it says is allows localities to assess for taxation on non-exempt leasehold interests. Tech would be a exempt leasehold interest, so you wouldn't be able to tax them.
I see what you're saying. Maybe we put it in brackets, non-exempt, right behind that commercial. And I always try to remember, and this, as a layman, looking at a code section isn't going to look at it necessarily the way, and some of the legislators and may just be looking at bullet points and see commercial.
Now, I don't know if you could have an instance where you could have a non-exempt residential.
Right. Well, isn't there, I was looking at the different code sections, if they started renting out residential property to professors and that were going to live on it,
If they were living on campus,
they're living on
and it was
campus.
an educational kind of setting, that would be a exempt.
Yeah.
But I thought, aren't they thinking about properties outside of campus to build on for?
That's one of the ideas
Right.
that they propose.
But Marty, I'm confused, and Supervisor Tuck, I'm confused with this because it's sort of like a double negative, but it's really not double negative kind of thing, so you got to help me understand it. Part of what we're trying to accomplish is for exempt business organizations, commercial.
What we're talking about is property that's otherwise exempt, right? If it's in the fee interest, the fee owner, the property is exempt for whatever reason. It's either,
Oh, okay.
in the case we're talking about, it's owned by
Okay,
the
I got it.
foundation.
I got
and
it.
so when they lease it,
Yeah,
if they lease
to
it to a
non-exempt.
non-exempt
Gotcha.
entity,
Okay.
we want to be able to tax that
Yes.
leasehold. Yeah.
Thank you.
I've got a question about that. Does this in any way cause any stress on our ongoing discussions that we're having right now with the foundation and the university? That's my first question. And then a follow-up sort of to that is, does that in any way put our General Assembly representatives in an odd situation, sort of between us and, you know, the foundation and tech? So those are my two questions.
I can address the second one. I know with the first one that when the town manager in Blacksburg and I have met with Dr. Dooley and Dr. Pinckney, we've made them aware that this has been discussed by the board, that it may be part of our legislative priorities. They are aware of that. They have not indicated whether at this point that would influence their thoughts on negotiation.
And I understand putting in our legislators, obviously they're trying to get more funding for tech, and that's good for our community. But at the same time, when we start saying that just in this one project alone, that our citizens are supplementing hundreds of thousands of dollars for the foundation to engage in commercial activity, that's where I have a difficulty, because we're basically saying, okay, we're going to say this is tax exempt. That means other taxpayers are going to have to pay more to cover the bill. And that's where I understand that may be a difficult job. We have difficult jobs too, and that's trying to figure out how to fund education and the other, 12 other aspects that we have to do as Board of Supervisors.
Well, if you amend the Code of Virginia, then it affects the entire state. And I'm thinking, see, I don't really know what other localities have worked out with, state universities that they have. So this isn't just, for us, it would be for everyone across the state, correct? If this were to go through. So those are just, just going over it and thinking about it. Those were things that came to mind.
Otherwise, I think it looks great. I think separating it the way that you did made it really pop a little bit better organized so that people can reference.
Looks really good.
Supervisor Biggs had discussed having like a rack card type format that would be easy to hand out. Are we, Jen, shaking your head, yes?
Yeah.
That's the plan.
I like that because it's a little bit different than what other localities are doing also.
Yeah.
I haven't seen that kind of palm card type thing.
And then it could have the little bitty logo there.
A long palm card.
Yeah.
Between
Or
now
front back even. I mean,
between now and the legislative dinner, which, by the way, will not be on November 18th. I'll get to that under my board report. I'll get to that in a few minutes.
spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. We'll have something for you to look at and get your thoughts. But, yeah, we do want to make it pop, and we have the staff to make stuff pop. So,
can we send these legislative priorities to our legislators after this evening, though? Can we vote on that? And the reason I say that is they're going to be drafting now, or already are drafting the legislation for the next session. And they have got to get consensus for folks that they're going to be meeting with in December. So that means they need to have things written within the next month.
I agree with that.
if that's the board's desire, we certainly can.
And then go over it again with them at the legislative dinner.
And then again in February.
And again in February.
And again after the General Assembly session when things aren't finished and passed, that we keep forgetting to do. We keep forgetting to bring them back and having them talk to us about what happened. I think that we need to put that back in place next year.
Need a motion in a second?
I make a
But we're in work session.
Oh, yeah. Thank
It would
you.
have to be after work session.
I would like
Thank
to
you.
add the rail maybe right under Transportation 81 because it does, the rail would help with 81.
The only other question I have about this is separating recreation and transportation. Would the trail possibly also go under transportation?
I think it's more. You know, I was thinking about how the trail, but for example, the property that we just got is probably not going to hook to that part of the trail kind of thing. So I wouldn't want to discount the fact that we would want to expand that network up in Jefferson Forest. So that's why I thought recreation made the most sense, but it doesn't mean that, you know.
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree with it being separated. I just didn't know if anybody had been thinking about it from that perspective.
I really like the way the sections go. They flow. They look good. And you've got it right above transportation, so it sort of leads right into it. It's the trail to transportation.
All right, well, when we move under new business, if there's a desire to move that forward, we'll move that forward.
I'm happy to make a motion to.
Once we get into new business.
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
thank you.
Thanks.
Sorry, I keep forgetting.
Yeah, I did too. I always forget that. Next item under work session is a request for real estate tax exemption for Christian Scholars Network doing business as Bradley Study Center. We received a request for a tax exemption for property they own at 104 Faculty Street. Property is assessed at $392,100. Annual taxes in 2018 were $3,489.69. The request is included in your packet. Traditionally, we have not made a recommendation, but sought the board's guidance on whether you feel that this is something that should be allowed.
I have a question. So, I perceive that the Bradley Study Center is an educational organization. Do we provide, this tax waiving, whatever we're calling this, to educational institutions? Okay.
Yeah.
And there's no separation of church and state kind of difference in any of that? Okay.
A couple of the purposes that are allowed under it would be religious and or charitable. They would fit into that.
I was looking through their application, and it appeared that their expenses far exceed their revenue.
They do.
How do they even function?
I don't know. the answer.
Donations, I'm assuming.
No, the donations are their revenue.
Mr. Chair, I'm not hearing any support for moving this forward.
If there, I guess what staff's looking for is consensus, either to move it forward or respond that there's not consensus to move it forward.
I have another question.
Is that correct?
Well, if the board did not want to, if they wanted to move forward, then we would just advertise and move forward.
Yeah, you have
But
a
if
public
not, then
hearing.
When we come out of work session, just a simple resolution.
Simple resolution,
Yeah.
okay.
I have a question. If we could, if I can recall that we didn't approve DePaul services.
We did approve.
We did? Okay.
We did.
I didn't.
Yeah.
Some of us did.
I did.
Most of us did. Mhm.
It goes back to my old saying, if you don't start it, you don't have to stop it.
Mr. Chair, what we may want to do is, while you're thinking about that, we have a second request, and this is for a personal property tax exemption. This is for Advanced Home Care. They have personal property at 48 West Main Street in Christiansburg. The assessed value for their personal property is $46,013 with a tax payment of approximately $404 a year. This is just for their personal property. It's not for their real estate. They, as Marty said in his memo, they appear to be a 501c3 that operates for charitable, education, religious, and secular purposes. We did notice on their tax return that Advanced Home Care has reported over $141 million in assets, and they pay salaries to their chief appointed officials.
$141 million, and they want us to give.
And we do have other companies similar to Advanced Home Care in the county.
Have we ever granted exemptions, though?
Not
for
to my
those?
knowledge, no ma'am.
Because I can't recall doing that, but
Mr. Chair, I'm not seeing anybody stating any support in moving this one forward either.
Nope, what we can do when we come out into new business is if there's a board member that would like to make a motion to deny the requests for tax exemptions that were discussed in work session, we can take that forward. Yes, sir. Board members, last item under work session this evening is an update on the Flieger Facility Structure Assessment Report and also an update on the former sheriff's office. Looks like we have a host of folks with us this evening to help with that. Yeah.
Good evening.
I don't either.
Good evening.
Great to see everyone again. Here tonight to give you an update on the former sheriff's building project and how it's kind of gone off on a little bit of a tangent here. I thought before getting into Mr. Leiball's presentation, I'll just give a quick summary to characterize how we got to here today, refresh everyone's memory. As you all know, we were hired to re-examine the former sheriff's building and the attached 911 facility, former 911 dispatch facility, to house the entities that are currently in this property.
Magistrate and court services.
Court services and county-owned property, the magistrate in the rented property. I believe it was early spring when we were considering options of renovated space and the consideration of whether or not we look at new space was proposed, and we were asked to go back and look at a potential new construction solution that would utilize the entire existing footprint of not only the sheriff's building but also to extend that towards the existing annex building. And then compare those costs between renovation and new construction. We presented that at the work session in June at the Animal Care and Adoption Center, if you recall, what those options were and what we saw as advantages and disadvantages between the two. I think from that meeting, the board then took it to the following meeting, through your discussion, a citizen, I believe, proposed that they would be willing to finance a structural and historical investigation of the existing annex or Flieger building that's been news to me. I never heard that name prior to that time. So we met with the county engineer and Mr. Meadows and several others to discuss what that scope of work would be. I made it clear that Thompson-Litton did not have that expertise in-house, that while we provide structural engineering, the level of historic investigation and so forth was not something that I felt comfortable with us providing that service. And furthermore, I felt it would be better to have a kind of a disinterested third party come in and do that anyway. So we met with two different potential companies from within the region, and ultimately we chose to engage Mr. Leiball's firm, HDH, located here in Christiansburg. So a few weeks ago, he was able to, over the past few weeks, he was able to conduct that investigation. So I just want to, that's my lead-in and an introduction to Mr. Leiball, and make it clear that we all understand what the properties are that we're talking about, and take a look here. The L-shaped is the existing sheriff's building, and then the single story next to it is the former dispatcher 911 building, and then the larger rectangle here is the annex or Fleeker building. So with that being said, I will introduce Mr. Leebaugh and allow him to tell you all about his investigation. One thing I will add, though, that this was a structural condition assessment. It's not a real in-depth analysis. There was not cost estimates associated with it. There was not structural formulas determining what needs to be done to make improvements. There's an assessment of the existing facility.
Thank you. Thank you all this evening for letting me be here. I don't know if I got anything else to add. A few things we'll talk about. Start with our credentials. HGH Associates is just down the street. We're on East Main Street, West Main Street. Been in business for about 36 years. Small architectural engineering firm. Basically, when you hire us, one of the principals is the ones that does all the work. So wear a shirt and tie today. A couple weeks ago, I was wearing Tyvek and crawling all through the building. Personal background on me, I was in facilities for 14 years. I also worked at James Madison's Montpelier. I was also an employee of the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and we've done a lot of historic work. We redid the Giles County Courthouse, work in Westmoreland on a lot of historic buildings. Amelia, we've done a lot of work at UVA, Virginia Tech, all over the state. So we do have a historic background. I love historic buildings also. Very brief history of the building, and of course everybody probably knows it anyways, but originally it was built in 1812 to 1813, single story, 2-room. Center picture kind of gives you an idea of what it looked like. 1899, second story was added, several other rooms, large rear was added to it, and then a little bit of work had been done later on. Wrong way. And as Jack was saying, I did an assessment. This is not a full in-depth structural evaluation of the structure. But when you're doing a structural assessment, one of the important things is look at the foundation and work your way up through the building. So again, put on Tyvek, crawl through the crawl spaces, measured, got probes, checked, look for rot and bad conditions. Structurally, the foundation is a stone foundation, which is acceptable. It's not unusual for that time period, and it's a good foundation. There are issues with it. Most of it is dealing with water infiltration. It's got a lime-based mortar. Water flowing through it will start eroding some of the mortar also. So as we look through some of the pictures, you'll see some of the erosion, some of the stuff that was left behind. Again, water infiltration. There's a sump pump. We no longer have power on the building. It'd be nice to get that re-energized and get the water out. And you see pictures of where water's coming through the exterior. Moving on. Picture in the upper left, stone foundation, and it has been painted. Look in the underside of the basement, and these two pictures are the opposite side of the same wall. Stone foundation, masonry going up, and it actually goes all the way up through the second floor. And again, when you look at pictures, right there you can see where some of the lime mortar has washed off over the years and it's piled up. This is a bench footer that had been added to it to strengthen it. It's very good repair detail. And you'll see that on that side of the other side of the wall also. I'm sorry, I'm left-handed. I do everything backwards. And again, you can see some repairs. There's some columns that were added. masonry. There's some of the old ones, some heavy beams running through. That's all part of the structure. Again, see the bench footer, masonry wall going up that's stone and brick above it. First floor framing, an interesting thing, most of the frame members are true 2x, so there's 2x12s and they measure 2 inches by 12 inches. There's some 2.5, there's some 3 inch, there's some different sizes, but again, look at the structure, look at the members, look at the condition of them, and there's some areas that have some rot, not excessive. Drew up sketches of the layout of the members, the span, how they made on center, what the size of the members are. There has been some repairs done. The structure above that wasn't bad. Evidently somebody had a heavy load sitting over top of it, so they added it. That's not a typical repair. It worked. It's worked for years. Again, more true members. There's your subflooring above it. There's some pictures of some rock. Again, water infiltration, that's where it's coming in through. Second floor framing, again, got some water leaking, got some rot on the subfloor there. The members aren't too bad there. On the front of the building, the original part is some cistern. I think that is a 3.5 by 6 inch member. Right beside it is a 2x12. Because it was a roof framing at one point, the height wasn't high enough and it sloped. I wanted to get it level, so they got cistern and framing between them. And again, more framing members, some heavy timbers, very interesting, very heavy structure. Masonry walls going all the way up through to the second floor, carrying the load on, structural load on the second, and it actually carries up through to the roof framing. Attic's fun to get in, it's kind of hard. Again, framing members, 2x8s, they're actually sitting on some 6x6s, spans kind of long for the 2x8s, but where we got leaks, we got rot. It's not unusual, not surprising. And again, wood framing members go into pockets on masonry walls, so there's a picture of one of them going inside. So look at the condition of the wall, look at the condition of the members, get a general indication of the condition of the framing members. I was there, looked at the roof, and thanks to the county, they brought a bucket truck over so I could get up there. Single slope, stainless steel metal roof, rusting, need some preventive maintenance on that. And there's a lot of nails sticking up. There's no real reason for that nail to be out there in the middle of the panel, and they're all over the place. Went up on a rainy day, gutters leaking. Got, I think I counted 8 leaks on Tuesday. Light rain, needed it bad, need more. At least 8 leaks were found within just that time period. There's some nice historic elements in there. That stairwell's pretty painted, it's got rubber tread on it. Facilities, it's a very good way of making them last. Come back and pull some of them off, and it's actually nice wood underneath. Strip, painted, stained, you could have a really nice stairwell. Code-wise, rise, treads, meet code. The size on the pickets are really close. Depends on how close you want to look at it. Framing underneath stairs look very good too. Didn't find any indication of rot on that. Windows, historic nature of building. Everybody wants to look at windows. There's 3 double hung windows in that building. I guess it was an attempt to make them storm windows, but don't know. I haven't seen too many of those over years. And again, you see the double tracks of a double hung window. Hardware there for shutters. Brick and mortar. Corner of the building, the original part, there's still some Flemish bond. It's a method of tying the outer and the inner widths of the brick. The rest of the building is just a mixture. Locally fired brick, it's a soft brick. We use a lime-based mortar. Repair attempts, got areas where got some Portland-based mortar. The mortar becomes stronger than the brick. It causes the face to fall off. There's actually places where somebody put in caulking trying to seal it. Needs some work on the mortar. You got pockets. That was actually a support member that was built into the wall when the brick was built up to give you somewhere to nail trim, nail the porch on the front of it. Suitability for future use. The existing framing members, if they're replaced, are really close to meeting requirements. 50 pounds per square foot live load, 100 pound for corridors. Based on modern lumber, when you start looking at the old growth that these are made out of, tree sizes, a little bit of extra supports, cut the spans down a little bit, depending on what you want to do and what spaces, it's easily adaptable to that. And like with anything, if you proceed on with the building, an in-depth study of the elements is very important before you go further. Brick or painted. Lime-based mortar bricks sometimes were designed to be painted, not with modern paint, but with like a lime-based paint, whitewash. If that's what you needed, that's what it needs to go back to. If you want to take the paint off, it needs to be studied carefully, can be done.
One thing I failed to mention before David began his study is when we met as a group to review the findings from the hazardous materials report and where asbestos was located, as well as lead-based paint. And then there was concern with the extent of mold within the building, but Mr. Leiball said it was characterized a little worse than he encountered. But he still wore your suit.
I wore that in crawl space.
No respirators.
Did not wear respirators. No.
That was the only thing that I failed to mention. Yes. So that, I think it was revealing in terms of the photos. You can see the current condition of this building right now.
I'm saying go to your mic.
Go to the mic so we can hear you.
Oh, sorry. I said I think the photos in particular are pretty revealing about the current condition of the building, and while there's some good bones still in there, there is a lot of evidence of some neglect and water infiltration that's caused some rot. According to David, I don't want to speak for you, but he feels those are things that could be repaired. Certainly not in moving condition. I think we'd all agree with that. And it also depends on what that use may potentially be. With regard to the sheriff's project, the former sheriff's building project, I do not see an easy fit for how that could accommodate that program. While some of the total loading that it may be capable of, very simple office space, you'd see at least a 50 pound per square foot total load provided. But if you start getting to anything like even a small conference room or any kind of file storage, we're almost doubling that amount. The stairway seemed to be in pretty good condition. That could accommodate that 100 pound total load, which would be meeting code. But otherwise, particularly with the roof, I think a significant amount of beefing up what's there right now. I mean, you can say that what the code would dictate and what practice would say for the roof to consider 30 pound square foot minimum with the snow loads, but it's hard to argue when it's been there for almost 200 years, right? Or, well, at least at one portion 120 years, and capable of holding whatever snows we've had in that period of time. But the code would indicate a a higher capability for the roof itself.
Any questions?
I have several. I'm trying to get my head around things and make sure I understand as we're going through this process. Roof would have to be upgraded to be code for us to be able to utilize the building. Is that accurate?
Yes, sir.
Help me to understand expense-wise versus upgrading and gearing up this roof and building a brand new one. You see what I'm saying? And trying to figure out costs and try to use taxpayer money wisely. So we've got the roof issue. If I hear correctly, the floors are going to need to be reinforced if we were to use this as an office building. Say court services as an example, just as an example. We're going to have to reinforce the floors because court services, at least at this point in time, is not paperless. They've got files, they've got weight. So that would be having to be something that would have to be done.
Correct.
Again, I understand that needs to be done. Is that an expensive process to reinforce, or is that a matter of taking a piece of oak, every other board, screwing it in and reinforcing in that way? I watch it with this old house occasionally.
But we're not going to use old round stumps like the couple of those pictures.
Yeah.
The spans, if you could cut the spans on some of the members, you can double the load pretty quickly.
Okay.
Capacities. So almost like cart before the horse. What are you intending to use in the spaces, and then we can look at structurally what would it take to strengthen those. It's doable. I know you're asking how much.
I gotta be looking at how much because it's not my
That's why I
money.
have this gentleman here. Come on.
Well, my statement with regard to the program for court services is that certainly the budget that's been established on that project, I do not believe it could be done within that budget. If there was another potential county use for it, then certainly.
That didn't have paper?
There were very few people, but I mean,
IT
how
department.
much
So
you
no
want to
paper and
spend
very
to do
few
that
people.
is a decision you need to make. I mean, it does require work, and if you're beefing it up here, you got to follow those
All the way down.
down through the building, and it comes down to the foundation, and it's not. You have to do all of it. You can't
Right.
just do part of it.
I get that part because then you end up with stumps that have been put
That's
into
right, and the
correction.
water infiltration, and then the windows, and the hazardous material abatement, those sorts of things too would come into that.
Craig, and this is also a question, there's been a couple of citizens that approached me about tax credits and similar things that were utilized over in Pulaski. In particular, I think you may have had some discussions, but it may have been just brief, about money that might be available and that we would be our own broker to be able to utilize those tax credits.
There are ways. I had a meeting with Steve Critchfield, who is an investor in Pulaski and has purchased several properties there. They have determined a way to sell the tax credits, syndicate. That's what I was, to syndicate their own tax credits. It is an expensive process, and it does not cover the full amount. So in other words, if you had a $3 million project to renovate this building, you could probably sell tax credits and generate, I shouldn't quote specifics. You could generate a portion of that money through selling of tax credits, but it would by no means cover the full amount of the restoration cost.
Okay. But it would obviously assist.
It could be a source of remedy, yes, sir, it would be.
Looking at this project, and I guess the foundation stone looks like it, am I wrong, is in pretty decent shape, the rock foundation that's there?
Yes.
Okay, so that aspect of it is good, but what we're talking about is, I guess, the floor joists of where water's infiltrated have started to cause, is that the photographs I saw that were causing rot?
Yes, there's areas that water's infiltrating and rotting.
Is that 10% of the areas, 50% of the areas? Do you see what I'm saying? I'm trying to get an idea of what, and before I forget, I go to the Giles County Courthouse on a regular basis. It's a beautiful building. You did a fantastic job restoring it. It's still the only courthouse I know of that rings the bell before they start court and then rings the bell again afterwards. And your guys preserved that history. So it's a pretty special place. And that building was built in 1836.
We added an elevator, you can't tell.
I know, and I know. It's really nice, and you worked with the heating and air system so you can, you don't have to shout over it, and got rid of the drop ceiling. But digressing along those issues, help me to understand the cost aspects. Are we talking about a 50% increase in cost, 25% versus tearing it down and building new? And is there a way to give me a ballpark figure before I spend another dollar of taxpayer money on exploring something like this? Or a volunteering citizen who ponies up money. Help me to understand, or versus new costs. Is there a way that you can kind of give me an idea?
If you go to look at a historic building, decide if you want to renovate it, salvage it, adaptive reuse, you start at the structure, try to determine if it's worth salvaging. And this one, the structure's good enough that you can go beyond that aspect, but I hate giving out numbers. You're probably 10-15% maybe of rotten throughout the structure. It'd really be nice to clean everything out of the basement. There's debris all over it and get a better look, but you'd be surprised the areas that I crawl back up inside and I'm like, nobody's watching me, I can get back in here. I was really impressed with what was there that was still really good shape. You look for rotten, checking wood, and I just didn't see a lot of that.
Okay.
But the brickwork needs a lot of work.
And that's the brickwork
specialized.
that I'm looking on the outside of it, and it looks like I can take a brick out.
Yes.
Matter of fact, I think it wouldn't take a. How serious is that? I mean, and then how, the cost of the courthouse, it seems like, I know y'all had to tear down part of the walls because I have one of those bricks at my office from the Giles County Courthouse.
Can we get that back, please?
No, the judge gave it to me and I'm keeping it. But the bricks that, I mean, obviously if it's going to be a historical structure, we need to try to replace those bricks with similar type bricks in a similar fashion. Structurally and expense-wise, what are we looking at in doing something like that? And I'm not holding you to ballpark, but I've got to try to figure out where to go from here, and I need some guidance.
And that's probably a number I can't give you here. Mr. Meadows, if it's something you'd like me to try to give you some approximate numbers, I can.
Are there a lot of craftsmen locally that even do that kind of work?
It takes a specialty, but yes, there are ones that do that. And again, the brick is a very soft brick, and you need to take the mortar out that's there and put the right type back. And it allows pliability, it allows movement, it allows moisture transmission in and out through that wall. So the lime mortar is very important, but it's very restorable.
Did the June presentation that you made, you had a tear down versus retro fit price, didn't you?
I did, but that price was to, we were never considering reuse of the annex at that time. What was proposed was, what if that wasn't there and we could use that property? So we then provided a cost to demolish
I see.
that building,
Okay.
the sheriff's building, and the other, and then move that new edge of building to form the edge of the courthouse square there in front of the public safety building. If I can try to help you hone in a little bit, This building, for example, was an older building, and the EDA had taken it over, but things weren't working with it. But several areas, I mean, the entire front entry was 4 feet underground. What's here right now was all underground. You can't drop 4 feet down. Part of our analysis was if the cost to repair it and renovate it for use and gain the square footage is less than 75% or so than building new, then it's a worthy undertaking. With regard to this building, I would think that the county would want to have the goal of restoring this historic building as the priority, not what is the return on our investment for this. I don't see it satisfying the program for the court services and the magistrate.
Okay.
Now, I've heard things such as maybe a tourism office or chamber, things like that, where you've probably seen in other communities similar things.
That does help me to look at it, because when I'm trying to figure out, we only have a limited budget, obviously, and there's lots of projects that we would like to look at, and if we can't use these for those two purposes, court services, selling that property and moving them down there, getting them close to the sheriff's office, and then also obviously the magistrate's office, which is a safety concern. And what you're telling me is this building is not going to be suitable for those two purposes. Am I kind of hearing that?
I think that, I believe that, yes, sir.
Okay.
However, remember that was not part of the original scope
Right.
of work, so we could go back to the other and still accommodate it there, but
I don't know that we would want a tourism office in front of the sheriff's office and jail. That's not the most friendly
I was just
location for
as an example,
tourism.
that sort of
I know, but
I mean, it would still
that
be
would
a
be a
public
lightweight
office.
use, and there's not a lot of those types of uses that we would have other than something like tourism or.
I forgot the price tag on the courthouse over in Giles, but I mean, have you done similar projects, similar square foot type projects that are in ballpark this shape?
I hate to admit I'm an engineer that doesn't remember numbers.
Okay.
I looked them up very quickly though, but I do like the 75%. That is a good
Rule of thumb.
rule of
litmus
thumb.
test.
Yeah.
Now, let's say that we made the decision not to tear it down. Let it sit there. It's going to continue to deteriorate and deteriorate quickly if you've got 8 water leaks, a roof with nails popping up through it, and water pouring into the basement with a sump pump that's not running. It's going to quickly deteriorate to the point that it's not going to be practical. Fair to say?
Yes.
One way or the other, we need to make a decision.
There is processes of mothballing a building to allow it to ventilate, fix the roof, do the drainage, fix the exterior, and leave the building set. That's kind of an in-between the two.
Okay.
That lack of ventilation combined with the water infiltration is what's obviously causing the mold issue.
Yeah.
So if we wanted to delay a decision, we would have to spend money in order to have that delay.
Absolutely. And with the roof, repairs, coating, get you 10, 20 years without any problem.
If I could segue, I know there's a little bit more that we need to discuss this evening, and it actually involves the former sheriff's office building, and you kind of hit it on the head when you said if we let a building sit and we want to have the potential to use it in the future, we have to spend money. We have an issue with the old sheriff's office that we need to discuss with you as well, because we're at a point that we've got to spend money on that building now if we intend to reuse that building. So I'll move to that, and then we can come back to any final.
But, yeah. That is correct. While during this process, the county engineer has been made apprised of some of the conditions in the existing building. We're back to the 2-story former sheriff's building, and the attached single-story building here. The one in green is a single-story. And two issues have arisen. One is that significant roof leaks have been detected. And again, back to that water infiltration ventilation, it was discovered, the roof leaks were discovered because the HVAC unit has stopped working. So those are the two issues that we're confronted with right now and need to make some sort of decisions moving forward. So if we go in a little more depth on the building roof, you can see to the left here, there's some infrared photos, and they're shown very hot. And if it's hot, it means there's water inside those areas. So it's saturated insulation. It was confirmed by doing some cores. This was a company, Tremco, who did this for Mr. Woodrum. Those two areas outlined in the red rectangle and then the smaller one are the ones where that was detected, and they also discovered not only insulation but the substrate, the OSB that's there that's supporting the roof on top of the rafters is also saturated. The extent of that damage is not known. You won't know that till you actually get that roof off of there. And then also the smaller roof, they said that it's in relatively good condition right now, but they would imagine that when you replace the other, that both should be done at that time. They're two very different types of roofs right now. So their estimate, that I believe is conservative, is about $100,000 to replace the two-story building roof. And then they had an estimate for the lower story of about $45,000. I think these things need to be done very soon. However, it's tied in with the rooftop unit as well that should also be replaced. The problem is we don't have a design yet for what the size of that needs to be. The price that we've received for the replacing the HVAC unit right now is about an in-kind replacement of $22,000. And that's a 10-ton unit that's on top. You can see right here, we're talking about this unit. That's a 10-ton unit, and this is about 3. This one's still working. This one, not at all. Our original study from a few years ago estimated, based on the people load with this program, that we would need at least a 12.5-ton unit. It's bigger. So they're closely related because you have to set the unit on a roof curb. So we need to know the roof curb sizes to replace the roof. Is that the best location for it? And then when we take it off, obviously when you get into the renovation of the project, we're going to want to be running all new ductwork anyway, just because the ductwork that's in there is really outdated. So while it all can be done and it can be tied in with the process overall, we want to accelerate these two aspects here to get that moving.
Was that in your original estimate?
Not at that value. We had if you recall the cost estimates we had, I believe we had $68,000 to replace the roof. We figured there would be costs for some repairs below that. We have escalated that to today's dollars, but it's not approaching that $145,000 number. So it's probably closer around it, let's say, 80,000 maybe, what was in our original estimate. As with any renovation project, as you remove things, there's ways to protect yourself in a competitive bid situation, to have allowances and unit prices such that if we got to repoint brick or replace sections of sheathing, we'll know that price in advance. You're not at the contractor's mercy at that point, but again, you won't know it until you remove that roof to see what that would be.
Can you go back 2 slides to the one that had 100,000 on it?
Yes, ma'am.
So the OSB is totally saturated.
At least in the areas
And
where the infrared indicated that the insulation being saturated. Now, we don't know.
So we are not able to look in there, but if the OSB is saturated, I mean, that's the ideal breeding ground for mold. They love that stuff.
I'm not a mold expert, but I would agree with that statement.
So this is just the roof, but this doesn't include any type of remediation should we get in there and find that we've got a pretty heavy-duty mold situation.
No.
I mean, I'm assuming it's been saturated for longer than 2 days, and that's how long it takes for mold to start growing, so.
We did know that there was other hazardous material within the building, and that would be abated during the selective demolition, but mold was not on that. And again, it goes hand in hand with the lack of ventilation. You get the infiltration and then lack of ventilation.
It's just living and loving.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mr. Meadows,
Yes, ma'am.
we have maintenance for buildings in our budget. Can any of that be used towards these expenses?
It could, however, if we try to use funds at that amount from our existing budget, we'll need to come back and ask for additional appropriations because when we budget for maintenance of facilities, we did not include these two buildings, and that was a comment that I was going to make as well, because I wanted to remind everyone that for several years, there was no contemplated reuse of these buildings. When the courthouse project was complete and we began work on the former courthouse to make it the public safety building, the discussion all along was that these two buildings were not going to continue to be used by the county. So we've done minimal work on these buildings. We've secured them. We removed the porch on the Flieger building a year or so ago because it was becoming a safety hazard, but we have not spent any preventive maintenance money on these buildings. Knowing what we know now, we would probably go back and take another look, especially at the sheriff's building. However, the sheriff's building, up until a year or so ago, we kept that building conditioned, if I remember correctly. We had not totally turned that building off, and I think that's how we discovered we had issues with the rooftop unit. Is that correct?
That's my understanding.
Yeah, I think that was, the roof issue has been a little bit of a surprise. Supervisor Bone, my recommendation would be if the board is considering moving forward with the renovation of the sheriff's office building for the projects we've talked about, that money come from a project budget and not from continuing maintenance money.
When we had our extended work session at Animal Shelter, did you say if we renovate the sheriff's building compared to tearing that one down and building it in its place, refurbishing it would save us $600,000? Is that correct? Is that what I remember?
I have with me here, I'll have to back out of this, the cost comparison between the demolition or the renovation versus demolition new construction.
I believe that's close. I can't remember numbers either anymore, and I'm a CPA.
We're talking about 100,000 more.
You got to that really quick, Jack. You must have known that was coming.
600,000, 553.
560.
Yeah, I thought it was 500,000.
Yeah, it's 553. Is that what that says?
495.
Which one? How do I get full screen on this one?
It's pretty close to 6.
Yeah, pretty close. That was
Making
good.
a lot of assumptions there.
It is. There we go. Okay, so on the right are the same figures and same format from the study that we did in end of 2016, 2017, escalated to assuming construction to start sometime in 2020. The figures on the left are assuming new construction, a single-story structure that didn't have an elevator or stairs, that occupied space roughly where the annex is, not quite taking the space, complete space of the single-story structure. So you can see the difference between those two are, what's that,
53.
$553,000.
Close to 600.
Yeah. close to 600,000.
Now what we've said
So
tonight.
right there, 553.
Yeah, so tonight, that 1369, 1,369,000 has probably gone up about 80,000 based on what we've talked about tonight with the issues with the HVAC and the roof.
I think that's a fair estimate. You can see the line item there for the new elevator and, new
Roof.
membrane roof at 67,200. That is escalated, actually, I'm sorry, to that figure before.
So when you got that up there for a new construction and renovation, what was you figuring a square footage of the new one?
The new square footage actually is, if you see here, it says 5,485 square feet. It's a little bit less than what's there right now because you can design the spaces to exactly the sizes they need to be. When you're adapting to an existing space, you make do with a little extra space or a little less space for some of your needs.
So it appears that costs are going up, and you're not probably 100% sure you won't find other issues in that building as you start into it. Is that correct? I mean, Supervisor DeMott's brought up the mold, but
I
it
don't
could
think
be
anyone can say that because that's kind of the nature of renovation. I mean, we try to add contingencies and ways to manage that, have a strategy in place, but you're right, once you open the wall.
Did you build in a little flexibility like 10% or something?
There is contingencies here, they're only 5%. You see that right now. It's a tumultuous bidding environment right now as well, so it's hard to say until bid day.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
Throw out something, and maybe we could even, obviously we need to take action sooner rather than later. That's apparent. Maybe we could put a vote for the next meeting in regards to this. And one of the things may be a compromise. I know there's folks here that are looking at all new. And I understand that we don't have a purpose for the Fligger building other than for historic preservation, and we don't have the funds to really do the historic preservation. But if some of my supervisors be willing to compromise, look at the renovation, save some money, but also keep the older building there, Souter building, or in the old sheriff's office, I would encourage you to think about that. One, it saves money, but also it helps preserve the nature. And if you remember, town of Christiansburg did ask us, and this is one of the things that Chair King has talked about on a regular basis is, Christiansburg is providing incentives for shop owners to upgrade their storefronts. And this would be a part of it, upgrading the storefront, so to speak, but also keeping some of the older buildings that are there. And so I'd ask it, one, I do believe that we have to make a decision, and that we need to make one quickly before there's more damage, as Supervisor Vice Chair DeMott has pointed out. So I would ask that we move quickly. That will also give the public an opportunity to share their concerns and their desires with us, but move it on in a quick fashion.
May I ask for a little bit of clarification? In this proposal, your recommendation, are you including properly mothballing the Fligger building?
I got to be a steward. As much as I want to see that building saved, we have to have a purpose for it, and we got to be able to look to taxpayers and say that that's the case. If we're going to mothball it, when are y'all going to, and I won't be on the board, so it'll be up to you guys, what purpose does it have? And before you can start expending money, I think you have to have a purpose. And on top of that, it's not a building that I think it would be responsible for the board to sell, because it's so close to the jail. It's so close to the public service building. It does not make sense to sell that building. We need to retain it. And so as I desperately would love to see that building repurposed. I don't see our two purposes that we have for it aren't suitable. We don't have a purpose for it now. And before I spend hundreds of thousands of dollars or $100,000 putting a new roof on it, $75,000 putting a tin roof on it if that's what needed to be done, and mothballing it, pumping it out, and doing those things, boards in the future are going to have a purpose for it, and it's going to cost money to renovate it. And I just don't know what that purpose might be. But I would like to at least preserve some of the buildings that we have there. That, you know, the old sheriff's office, parts of it go back to the turn of the century. There's a lot of history there. A lot of different sheriffs have served in that building, and it would be continue to be used, and we could save money potentially.
Well, and there's also the cost savings of getting out of a lease that is quite expensive.
Yes.
And also being able to sell another piece of property that we're in. So there are cost savings associated with that as well.
Would everybody be okay and have enough time if we put this on the next meeting?
I think we need to move forward with a decision.
Well, that's, and
Yeah, I'm really worried about the conditions.
I appreciate that, because I was going to strongly recommend that we need to make some decisions by the end of this month, because appreciate Bob Poff's support and understanding and contribution to getting this work done. We need to recognize and move a decision forward so that he and others will know which way that project's going. Also, if it's not rained in a long time, but if it starts raining again soon, well, yeah, there's a chance tomorrow, that's right. That old sheriff's office building is going to continue to be a growing issue.
We definitely need a decision on the existing sheriff's building. I mean, no decision or indecision is a decision.
You're right.
It's going to get worse, so we need to take care of that.
That's why I say we'll bring it up at our next board meeting and
Vote.
vote one way or another. Is there something we need to do to the old sheriff's office Fort Range tomorrow? Maybe Scott could hold an umbrella or something.
Can you go
We're gonna put you on the roof with an umbrella, Scott.
Be like Mary Poppins.
A big
Any
tarp.
other, I'm sorry?
A big tarp.
Yeah. Any other questions for Mr. Lelong?
Appreciate, Jack, all your work. I do appreciate everybody's work on this project, because
All right.
Thank you.
Agree with us?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
thanks.
I was gonna make a motion to have a work session.
Is there a motion to come out of work session?
So moved.
Second.
Madam Secretary, call roll, please.
Mr. Shepherd?
Aye.
Mr. Tuck?
Aye.
Mr. Fidzikowski?
Aye.
Mr. Motts?
Aye.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Aye.
Chair King?
Aye.
7 ayes.
All right. It's been communicated to me by the board members that they would like a 10-minute break. So we'll reconvene at 9:35. Or actually, by Verizon time, 9:38. Just ignore the clock in the back of the room. Board members will reconvene and move into new business. First item of new business this evening is NRV Water Authority Second Amendment and Restated Water Agreement. You have a resolution to approve the Second Amendment to the Water Agreement and affirm the county's support for the Water Authority's capital projects.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, sorry. Sidebar, sorry. Just had a motion in a second on this one.
Supervisor Tuck?
Aye.
Mr. Fidzikowski?
Aye.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Ms. Bowman?
Aye.
Mr. Shepherd?
Aye.
Mr. Motts?
Aye.
Chair King?
Aye.
7 ayes.
Board members, before I move to the second item of new business, we talked about the two real estate tax, or excuse me, the two tax exemptions under work session on advice of the attorney, and I concur. If the consensus is to not move forward with those two, we will have a resolution on the next meeting in October to deny those two requests. That way we can make sure we've got the proper language in those resolutions, if that's the consensus. And I see heads, so we'll have that on the October 27th.
Got to be careful about going down that road.
28th agenda. Next item is New River Land Trust real estate taxes. This is a transfer from general contingencies. New River Land Trust is donating 5 land parcels to the town of Blacksburg for a nature park. While the land trust is on the property, they were assessed real estate taxes from the county on these parcels. It was not the intent when they took ownership of those properties for them to wind up paying taxes on it, but that's we do not have the ability to waive taxes, so they have paid both installments of the taxes. I believe that's correct, Carol. So we're requesting, the land trust has requested reimbursement for the taxes that were paid in the amount of $5,326, and we are requesting that those funds come from general contingencies.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Madam Secretary, call roll, please.
Mr. Fisakowski?
Aye.
Mr. Motts?
Aye.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Ms. Bone?
Aye.
Mr. Shepherd?
Aye.
Mr. Tuck?
Aye.
Chair King?
Aye.
7 ayes.
Board members, last item under new business this evening is a resolution recognizing and congratulating New River Community Services on their 50th anniversary.
So moved.
Second.
Ma'am.
I'd like to, Mary, aren't you the chair of the New River Valley Community Services Board?
Yes.
So congratulations. That's a great honor. So I know how hard you work to chair that board.
Well, it's a really good group of people, and like I told you all before, we should be really, really proud of our New River Valley Community Services Board and the staff, because what they have done, they are leaders in the state. And across the state, including Fairfax, as I told you before, come and ask how it's done in the New River Valley, and that's quite a compliment. So.
Good job.
Mr. Motts?
Aye.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Ms. Bone?
Aye.
Mr. Shepherd?
Aye.
Mr. Tuck?
Aye.
Mr. Fisakowski?
Aye.
Chair King?
Aye.
7 ayes.
Now, look, he's getting ready over there. County Attorney's report.
I have no report, but
Wait.
I didn't know, did the board want to vote on the legislative priorities?
Yeah,
That's
that
exactly
was,
what I just said.
we were supposed to add that to new business.
With the,
my report, I would.
with the addition
That was your
of
report.
Rail 2020.
Yeah.
Yes.
I guess do we need to
Thank
make
you.
a motion to add it to our agenda?
New business.
Sure, yeah.
I would make that motion to add it to new business.
Second.
Any discussion?
With the addition of the Rail 2020.
Yeah.
Good job. Madam Secretary, call roll.
Mr. Fisakowski?
Aye.
Mr. Motts?
Aye.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Ms. Bone?
Aye.
Mr. Shepherd?
Aye.
Mr. Tuck?
Aye.
Chair King?
Aye.
7 ayes.
Now we need to make-
Then need to make a motion to approve it with the
Now-
addition of the rail.
Now
That was
we
to
need-
add it to the agenda, yep.
all right, now we need to make a motion to approve it.
So moved. Second.
Or
You can.
that's fine.
Yeah, okay.
I'll let whoever Mickey says is fine with it.
Madam Secretary, call roll, please.
Mr. Motts?
Aye.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Ms. Bone?
Aye.
Mr. Shepherd?
Aye.
Mr. Tuck?
Aye.
Mr. Fisakowski?
Aye.
Chair King?
Aye.
7 ayes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marty.
Now we're going to give Marty a second chance.
Yeah, got to hear the report.
I'll go ahead and defer my 2 minutes so the administrator can have more than 2 items.
Oh, my.
No, don't do it.
County Administrator report.
Well, I hate to disappoint the county attorney, but I actually have no report this evening.
Yeah, you said something
Do
about,
what?
something about November 18th.
Yeah.
Oh, I know. I'd already forgot about that. Thank you. Mr. Chair, I have a couple of items. I only have one, and so because I forgot it earlier. We have already heard back from several of the legislators that November 18th does not work for them because they have some session in Richmond that day. A special session that day, so we'll have to look out into December for a date, and we'll be back in touch. So that's my report. Sorry about that.
Supervisor Shepherd.
No report.
Supervisor Tuck.
I was going to ask that another item to be put on the agenda that we talked about before, and that was flow control. I've been doing a little bit of research. I feel more comfortable with that issue, and I was going to ask if we could go ahead and put that. I mean, I don't know what the next meeting is looking at like, but if we could look at putting it in the
Work
next
session or
actual vote. I feel comfortable enough to be voting on it at this point in time. I don't know if other supervisors feel comfortable.
What was it again, Chris?
Flow control in regards to the Solid Waste Authority.
Oh.
And I imagine when we put that on the agenda, there will be some folks that will be there, but that will be speaking to us in regards to it. So it will be an item that will take up some time.
Are they still asking for that?
Yes.
Well, yes, sir. Let's order it
I
done.
think they need to know one way or the other at some point in time of where we're at on it.
Thank you.
We have the Solid Waste Authority annual meeting on Thursday, don't we? So
Thursday night.
there's my couple of items, by the way.
Supervisor Steve.
Yeah, I would second Supervisor Tuck's suggestion that we take a vote on flow control. I would love to see the county take the lead in this. The two towns have yet to take a vote, and they need to do that also. But I am free to talk to any of you anytime that you have questions about what's going on with that. Just give me a call. That is all.
Thank you, sir. Supervisor Biggs.
No report.
What? Y'all been hanging around Marty. Supervisor Bone.
I'd like to recommend that we pursue a resolution to declare the federal holiday of Columbus Day to be the Indigenous Peoples' Day. What did I say before? I apologize.
I think what you're trying to do is you want to have it so that it's recognized at the county level
At the
for
county
that, because
level.
you can't change a federal
Right.
thing. Yeah.
Right. I just want to make sure I phrased that correctly. I
I think I'm the
apologize.
cleanup person tonight.
So you're asking for a resolution on the next meeting to
Yes.
consider whether to rename it as Indigenous Peoples' Day?
Not
Or designated also.
not rename
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, we can't.
As also.
Also.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah, we don't have the authority to change it, but
Moving forward, not to say that yesterday was Indigenous Peoples' Day. That's it.
Is that it? Vice Chair DeMott.
Two very quick items. One, to follow up from our presentation that we were going to have tonight on the MPO, updating us on the Valley to Valley Trail Initiative. Are we going to reach back out and
Yes.
try to get that scheduled on a, okay, perfect, because I definitely was very interested in hearing that. And then also, I wanted to communicate a giant thank you from the Parks and Rec Commission for the great event that was held at Creed Fields, the dedication and groundbreaking for that. They were all very excited. There were a few members of the Parks and Rec Commission that were able to be present, and they thought it was a wonderful event. So wanted to communicate to staff that were responsible for organizing that, and to those of us that were able to attend. They really, really appreciated the support for that project moving forward.
Can I just add, I thought it was really moving that so many former supervisors came that had served with Gary. I thought that was
Yeah.
really meaningful.
I feel like staff probably reached out to former supervisors to invite them. Maybe. So thanks for that.
That's really cool.
And that's all that I have.
I just got one thing. I'd like to thank Christiansburg Fire Department and town of Christiansburg for putting on such a good fire prevention parade the other night. It was well attended and they worked hard to get it going. And just a reminder, the burn ban is still on.
Yes, it is.
So please don't have no open air fires.
And even if it rains tomorrow, it will still likely be on for a while.
Right.
For a long time.
And if you do, I know it's getting cool at night, if you do fire up your wood stove, please, when you dump your ashes, put them in a bucket of water. That being said, if nothing else, I ain't adjourned yet. Where you going?